The smell of antiseptic and quiet suffering clung to the air, a sterile shroud over the raw animal grief that filled the small room. Elias Thorne stood over the steel table, his shadow falling across the still form of his dog, Triton, his partner, his brother. The rhythmic, shallow beep of the heart monitor was a fragile thread in the profound silence, each pulse a victory against the inevitable. A white bandage was wrapped around the dog's graying muzzle, stained with a single, perfect circle of crimson. Another covered his ribs, where the rise and fall of his breath was barely perceptible. Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation but a man who understood the bond between a soldier and his K9 better than most, held up an X-ray to the light. The image was a constellation of fractures. 3 ribs, shattered, a hairline crack in the ulna, deep tissue bruising that the film couldn't show, but Elias could feel it in his own bones. "It wasn't a car, was it?" Elias said. It wasn't a question. His voice was unnervingly calm, a low baritone that seemed to absorb the room's ambient hum. It was the voice he used before a breach, the sound of stillness before the storm. Dr. Aris shook his head, his face etched with a weary anger. "No, the fractures. They're from focused impacts. A boot, maybe. The contusions on his head are consistent with being struck repeatedly. Deliberate, Elias. Cruel." Elias looked at his hands. They were large, covered in a roadmap of pale scars that told the story of a life spent in the shadows, fighting monsters. They were steady, not a tremor. But inside, a cold, clean fire was being lit, the kind that burns not with chaotic rage, but with the focused, clarifying heat of purpose. He reached down, his fingers gently tracing the outline of Triton's ear, the one that was split from shrapnel in Kandahar. The dog's tail gave a single, weak thump against the cold steel. An acknowledgement. "I'm still here, boss." Elias leaned in close, his lips brushing the soft fur. "Who did this to you, boy?" He whispered, a promise sealed in the sterile air. "Who did this? What would you do if the only soul in the world who understood your darkness was nearly extinguished by the careless cruelty of others? You're about to find out what a man like Elias Thorne does. He doesn't get angry. He gets even. He becomes the monster they should have been afraid of all along." The story of Elias and Triton didn't begin in this quiet, tragic room. It began in the screaming chaos of a desert night, under a sky full of hostile stars. Elias was pinned down, his leg a ruin of blood and bone, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth. A machine gun nest had this zeroed, spitting fire and death in a relentless rhythm. His team was scattered. He was alone, and then he wasn't. A black shape, low and fast, had exploded from the darkness. Triton, not a pet, but a weapon system with a heartbeat. He hit the nest, with the force of a freight train, a blur of teeth and fury. The gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was filled only with the sound of Elias's own ragged breathing and the low growl of his partner, standing guard over the fallen enemy. Triton had saved him, not just that night, but every night since. When Elias came home, the uniform hung up for good. The wars were supposed to be over, but they weren't. They just moved inside. They lived behind his eyes, in the quiet moments when the world fell away. The nightmares, the shakes, the hollow ache of things seen and done that could never be undone. No therapist, no pill, no bottle of whiskey could reach that place. Only Triton, the old dog, now retired himself, moved with the stiff grace of a warrior past his prime. His joints ached, his hearing was going, but his eyes were the same. They held a deep, knowing intelligence. When Elias woke up in a cold sweat, a silent scream caught in his throat. Triton's heavy head would rest on his chest, a warm, grounding weight in the darkness. The dog's soft snores were a lullaby that chased the ghosts away. He was the anchor, the living, breathing soul who had been through the fire with him and bore the scars to prove it. Their life now was a quiet ritual of mutual care. Slow walks by the lake, where Elias would sometimes have to help Triton over a fallen log, special food for his aging digestive system, a soft, orthopedic bed positioned right next to Elias's own. They were two halves of a whole, two veterans navigating a peaceful world that felt more alien than any war zone. Elias owed him a debt that could never be repaid, a life for a life, an oath sworn not in words, but in blood and loyalty under a foreign moon. And as he stood in that vet clinic, the sterile beeping of the monitor counting down the seconds of his friend's life, Elias Thorne remembered that oath. The debt was coming due, and he was the collector. The fire inside him was no longer just a spark. It was an inferno, controlled and channeled into a single, diamond-hard point of resolve. Someone had mistaken his partner's age for weakness. They had mistaken his gentleness for cowardice. They had mistaken Elias Thorne's quiet retirement for surrender. They were about to learn, in the most permanent way imaginable, how wrong they were. The world had forgotten what a man like him was capable of. He was about to remind them. The hunt was on. The first step was the video. A young woman, her face pale with a mixture of fear and guilt, had approached him in the chaotic moments after he'd found Triton. She'd been too afraid to intervene, but her phone had been recording. "I'm so sorry," she'd stammered, pressing the phone into his hand. They were laughing. Elias didn't watch it in the vet's waiting room. He couldn't. He needed control. He needed a sterile environment, not for medicine, but for analysis. He went home to the empty house, the silence a screaming accusation. Triton's water bowl was still full. His favorite worn-out tennis ball lay by the door. Elias walked past it all, went to his study, and plugged the phone into his laptop. He sat in the dark, the only light coming from the screen. He pressed play. The video was shaky, filmed from across the park. It showed Triton tied to the bench outside the small grocery store, waiting patiently as he always did. Then they appeared. 4 of them, young men radiating the kind of effortless arrogance that comes only from inherited wealth. They moved like they owned the ground they walked on. Their laughter was loud, obnoxious. One of them, the clear leader, pointed at Triton. Elias zoomed in. The boy was handsome in a vapid, predictable way. Expensive watch, designer polo shirt, a smirk that had never been wiped off his face by hardship. This was Chad. Elias didn't know his name yet, but he knew his type. The predator who targets the weak because he's never had to face the strong. They circled Triton. The audio picked up their words, sharp and cruel. "Look at this ugly thing. It's covered in scars, probably rabid. Let's have some fun." Elias's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He watched as they started small, tossing pebbles at the old dog. Triton just blinked, his tail giving a hesitant, confused wag. He was trained to ignore distractions, to remain calm. His stillness only seemed to egg them on. The leader, Chad, sauntered forward and nudged Triton with the toe of his pristine white sneaker. "Hey, Mutt, do something." Triton just looked at him with those ancient, knowing eyes. And that's when the boy's smirk curdled into something uglier. He kicked, not hard at first, but it was enough. A sharp, contemptuous strike to the dog's flank. Triton flinched, letting out a soft yelp. That sound, that tiny pained whimper, was a detonator in Elias's soul. The other boys laughed, emboldened. They joined in. The video became a sickening montage of casual brutality. Kicks, a thrown can of soda that burst against Triton's head, drenching his fur in sticky liquid. They pulled his tail, and through it all, Triton didn't fight back. He was a soldier. He followed his last command, stay. He endured, his training and loyalty overriding his instinct for self-preservation, until his old legs buckled and he collapsed onto the pavement. The video ended with the boys high-fiving, climbing into a gleaming black Range Rover, and speeding away, their laughter trailing behind them like a poison cloud. Elias watched it once, twice, a third time. He wasn't watching for the horror anymore. He was a hunter studying his prey. He broke it down frame by frame. The license plate was blurred, but he got 3 letters and 2 numbers. Not enough. He focused on the details. The logo on Chad's polo shirt. A stylized cypress tree. The crest of the Cypress Point Country Club, the most exclusive and expensive club in the state. A sticker on the Range Rover's back window. A decal for a local university's lacrosse team. He cross-referenced the partial plate with black Range Rovers registered in the county. He pulled public records for members of the Cypress Point Country Club. He scanned the university's lacrosse team roster. The digital breadcrumbs began to form a trail. It took him 4 hours. 4 hours of silent, methodical work, the skills of a Tier 1 operator repurposed from tracking terrorists in the Hindu Kush to hunting entitled brats in suburbia. The process was the same. Identify, locate, isolate. By dawn, he had a name, Chad Covington, and more. He had the names of his 3 friends. He had their addresses, their class schedules, their social media profiles, which were filled with smiling, vapid photos of boats, parties, and privilege. And he had the name of Chad's father, Marcus Covington, a real estate mogul, a man whose name was on half the new developments in the city, a man with deep pockets and, Elias suspected, even deeper connections. This changed the equation. This wasn't just about 4 stupid kids. This was about power. About a system that allowed a boy like Chad to believe he could commit such an act without consequence. Elias stood up and walked to a locked footlocker in the corner of his room. He opened it. It was mostly empty, filled with mementos of a life he'd left behind. Medals he never wore, a folded flag, but in one corner, tucked away, was a small, hardened case. He opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, was a satellite phone and a small, encrypted hard drive. He hadn't touched them in years. They were his emergency contacts, his connections to a world that operated in the gray spaces, a world of shadows and whispers. He picked up the satellite phone. The battery was still good. He powered it on, the familiar beep a ghost from his past. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang once. A voice on the other end answered, no greeting, just a single, expectant word. Go. It's Ghost, Elias said, using his old call sign. There was a pause on the other end, a beat of recognition. Then the voice came back, warmer this time. Ghost, it's been a long time. Everything okay? No, Elias said, his eyes fixed on the frozen image of Chad Covington's smirking face on his computer screen. I need information, unofficial. I need to know everything there is to know about a man named Marcus Covington, his business, his partners, his enemies, everything he wouldn't want the world to see. There was another pause. Consider it done. What's the context? Elias looked over at the empty space on the floor where Triton's bed should be. They hurt my dog. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. But Elias could feel the shift. It was the sound of a door being opened, of resources being mobilized. It was the sound of a brotherhood that never died. "Say no more, Ghost," the voice said, the tone now as cold and hard as steel. "We're on it. Stand by." Elias ended the call. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the floor. A new day was dawning. For Chad Covington and his father, it would be the last peaceful one they would ever know. The hunter was no longer just analyzing. He was moving, and he would not stop until the debt was paid in full. He didn't go after Chad first. The leader was the prize, but the foundation of any structure is always its weakest point. That was Tyler Brandt, the lacrosse player, the one in the video who looked hesitant, whose kicks were half-hearted, who glanced around nervously while the others laughed. He was the follower, the one desperate for the approval of the alpha. He was the one who would break. Elias found him 2 days later, not at his dorm, not at practice, but at the university library. It was a place of quiet, of perceived safety. Elias moved through the towering shelves of books like a wraith. Silent and unseen, he found Tyler at a carrel, in a deserted section on 19th century literature. The boy was scrolling through his phone, a bored expression on his face. Elias didn't approach from behind. He came from the side, appearing suddenly in the boy's peripheral vision. He sat down in the chair opposite him, moving with an economy of motion that was utterly noiseless. Tyler jumped, his phone clattering onto the table. "Jesus, man, you scared me." He looked at Elias. He saw a man in his late 40s, dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He saw the scars on his arms, the calm, unnerving stillness in his eyes. He saw nothing he could recognize as a threat, and yet a primal alarm bell was screaming in his skull. "Can I help you?" Tyler asked, trying to inject a note of his usual bravado into his voice. It came out as a squeak. Elias said nothing. He simply placed his own phone on the table between them and pressed play. It was the video, the one from the park. He'd edited it. It was just a loop, 10 seconds long, of Tyler himself delivering a clumsy kick to Triton's ribs, followed by a close-up of Triton's pained yelp. Over and over. Kick, yelp, kick, yelp. The color drained from Tyler's face. He looked like he was going to be sick. He snatched the phone, his thumb fumbling to stop the video. "Where did you get this? Who are you?" "I'm the man whose dog you tried to kill," Elias said. His voice was a whisper, but it cut through the library's silence like a razor. It held no anger. It held something far worse. It held a chilling, absolute certainty. Tyler started to stammer, the lies coming fast and clumsy. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not me. It was a joke. We were just messing around. The dog is fine, right?" Elias leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Tyler's. He didn't blink. "He has 3 fractured ribs, a punctured lung. He's on a ventilator. The vet gives him a 50-50 chance of surviving the night. Every breath he takes sounds like broken glass." He let the words hang in the air, each one a lead weight. "So you tell me, is he fine?" Tyler was trembling now, his manufactured confidence stripped away, leaving only the terrified child underneath. He looked around the empty library aisle, as if searching for an escape. There was none. "What do you want?" he whispered. "Money? I can get you money." The dark irony of the offer, the first resort of the cowardly and the rich, was not lost on Elias. "I want a name," Elias said, his voice dropping even lower. "The leader, the one with the watch." "Chad," Tyler blurted out, the name tumbling from his lips in a rush of terrified relief. Chad Covington. It was his idea, all of it. I told him to stop, I swear. Elias knew he was lying. He didn't care. He had what he needed. He stood up, his movement as fluid and silent as his arrival. Tyler flinched back in his chair. "That's it?" the boy asked, his voice full of disbelief. "You're just going to leave?" Elias paused, turning his head slightly. The look in his eyes made Tyler's blood run cold. "For now," he said, "but I have your name. I have your address. I know where you sleep. If my dog dies, I will come back, and when I do, there will be no conversation. We will simply have an understanding." He didn't need to elaborate. The threat, unspoken and minimalist, was more terrifying than any shouted promise of violence. It was a guarantee, delivered with the calm authority of a man who had walked through hell and was not afraid to go back. Elias turned and walked away, disappearing into the labyrinth of shelves as silently as he had come. He left Tyler Brandt sitting there, shaking in the cathedral-like silence of the library, the looped video of his own cruelty playing over and over in his head. The boy would have nightmares for a long time. That was the point. Fear was a tool, and Elias was a master craftsman. One down, now for the head of the snake. But first, he had to deal with the snake's nest. He had to understand the power behind the name Covington. As he drove away from the university, his satellite phone buzzed. A single, encrypted text message. It contained a data file. He pulled over, opened his laptop, and downloaded the contents. It was the information he'd requested, a complete workup on Marcus Covington. And it was worse than he had imagined. Marcus wasn't just a successful developer. He was a predator of a different kind. A history of shady deals, bullied partners, environmental violations that were made to disappear with hefty donations to the right political campaigns. He owned judges, city council members, and the chief of police, a man named Frank Miller, who owed his career to Covington's patronage. The file was a detailed map of a corrupt empire built on intimidation and greed. Chad wasn't an anomaly. He was a product. The arrogant, cruel son of an arrogant, cruel father. He had been taught his entire life that the rules didn't apply to him, that his wealth was a shield that made him untouchable. Elias closed the laptop. The cold fire within him burned brighter. This was no longer just about justice for Triton. This was about tearing down an entire rotten structure. To get to the son, he would have to go through the father, and Marcus Covington had no idea what was coming for him. He thought his walls of money and influence could protect him. But Elias Thorne was a ghost, and ghosts don't knock. They walk right through the walls. The Cypress Point Country Club was a fortress of privilege. Manicured lawns, whispering fountains, and a hushed atmosphere of old money and new power. It was Marcus Covington's sanctuary, his court, and it was where Elias decided to make his stand. He didn't try to sneak in. He walked through the front door. The receptionist, a prim woman with a forced smile, looked up. "May I help you, sir?" Her eyes flickered over his simple clothes, his scarred hands, the intensity of his gaze. Her smile tightened. "Members only." Elias didn't respond. He simply walked past her, his stride unhurried and deliberate. A security guard, a burly man who looked more suited for a bar fight than a country club, moved to intercept him. "Hey, buddy, you can't go in there." Elias stopped. He didn't look at the guard's face. He looked at his hands, then his feet, assessing his stance, his balance. The guard saw the look, and a flicker of professional unease crossed his face. This was not the kind of man he was used to dealing with. "I'm here to see Marcus Covington," Elias said, his voice calm and even. "He's not available." The guard grunted, puffing out his chest. "I'll wait," Elias replied, and with a subtle shift of his weight, he moved past the guard before the man could even react. It wasn't aggressive, it was just efficient. The guard found himself off balance, grasping at empty air. By the time he recovered, Elias was already walking across the opulent dining terrace. He found them at a prime table overlooking the 18th green. Marcus Covington sat at the head, holding court with a city councilman and the chief of police, Frank Miller. Chad was there, too, laughing at some joke, his face a mask of unearned confidence. He looked healthy, happy, untroubled. The sight of him sent a fresh wave of cold fury through Elias. Elias approached the table. The conversation faltered as the three powerful men looked up, their expressions shifting from amusement to annoyance at the intrusion. "Excuse me," Marcus Covington said, his voice smooth but edged with a steel. "This is a private club." He waved a dismissive hand. "Security." Elias ignored him. His eyes were locked on Chad. The boy's laughter died in his throat as he recognized the man from the library, the man from Tyler's terrified phone calls. The color drained from his face. "Dad," Chad whispered, a note of panic in his voice. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He looked from his son's pale face to the stranger standing before them. "Do I know you?" he asked. "No," Elias said, "but you know my dog. Your son and his friends used him as a punching bag 2 days ago." He pulled out his phone and placed it on the pristine white tablecloth. He pressed play. The video started, the sounds of the boy's cruel laughter and Triton's yelp cutting through the genteel murmur of the terrace. Diners at nearby tables turned to look. Chief Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus Covington watched the first few seconds of the video, his expression unreadable. Then with a sigh of bored irritation, he swiped it off. "All right, I see." He pulled out a gold money clip, thick with $100 bills. He peeled off a dozen and pushed them across the table. "Boys will be boys. I'm sure your animal is fine. Take this. For your trouble. Go buy a new one." The casual disdain, the absolute certainty that money could solve anything, was more insulting than any threat. It was the philosophy of a man who had never faced a problem he couldn't buy his way out of. Elias looked at the money, then back at Marcus. A small humorless smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "My dog is not a thing you can replace," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He served this country for 6 years. He has 2 Purple Hearts. He saved the lives of a dozen men, myself included. He has more honor in his crippled back leg than your son has in his entire body." He pushed the money back across the table. "And you can't afford him." Marcus Covington's mask of civility finally cracked. The charming facade fell away, revealing the ugly, ruthless man beneath. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he snarled, his voice low and menacing. "You walk in here, into my club, and you make accusations. You have no idea who you're dealing with. And you have no idea who you've wronged," Elias countered, his gaze unwavering. Chief Miller, seeing his patron's anger, decided it was time to earn his keep. He stood up, placing a heavy hand on Elias's shoulder. "All right, that's enough. You're coming with me. We can sort this out down at the station." It was a mistake. In one fluid motion, Elias rotated. He didn't strike. He didn't push. He simply used Miller's own momentum against him, applying precise pressure to the man's wrist and elbow joint. Miller found himself spun around, his arm locked behind his back in a hold that was both unbreakable and excruciatingly painful. He let out a surprised grunt, his face contorting in pain. He was completely immobilized, helpless. Elias held him there, his grip like iron, his eyes still fixed on Marcus Covington. The entire terrace was now silent, all eyes on their table. The power dynamic had shifted in a single, shocking moment. "Your boy is sloppy, Marcus," Elias said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "He left a witness. He left a video. And you, Chief Miller, are now attempting to intimidate a witness and obstruct justice. It's a bad look." He released the chief, shoving him lightly forward. Miller stumbled, clutching his arm, his face a mixture of fury and humiliation. Elias looked back at Marcus, whose face was now a thunderous mask of rage. "This isn't over," Marcus hissed. "You have no idea what's coming for you." Elias almost smiled. "No, Marcus," he said, the finality in his tone chilling the air. "You have no idea what's already here." He turned and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't thrown a punch. But he had declared war, and in the heart of Marcus Covington's kingdom, surrounded by his court, he had proven that the walls the man had built around himself were made of glass. And Elias Thorne was holding a hammer. The gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, held in the grand ballroom of a hotel that Marcus Covington owned. It was a night for the city's elite to congratulate themselves, to see and be seen. For Marcus, it was a public display of his power and influence. He stood near the entrance, greeting guests, his humiliation at the country club buried beneath a veneer of affable charm. Chad stood beside him, looking pale and subdued. The encounter with Elias had clearly shaken him, but the familiar comfort of his father's world, a world of tuxedos and champagne and deferential smiles, was beginning to restore his sense of invincibility. Marcus had assured him it was being handled. The man would be dealt with. A nobody. A ghost. Then the ghost walked in. Elias Thorne wore no tuxedo. He was dressed in the same simple, functional clothes as before. He didn't belong. Every head turned. The polite chatter in the ballroom died down, replaced by a ripple of whispers. He was a stone, tossed into a placid, self-satisfied pond. He walked directly toward Marcus, his steps measured and silent, his eyes holding a cold, unyielding fire. The two security guards Marcus had personally hired, large men with wires in their ears, moved to block his path. Elias didn't even break stride. "I wouldn't," he said, his voice a low command that carried in the sudden silence. It wasn't a threat of violence. It was a statement of fact. The guards hesitated, looking to their employer for direction. They saw the flicker of uncertainty in Marcus's eyes, and that was enough. They held their ground but did not advance. Elias stopped a few feet from Marcus and Chad. "We need to talk," he said. Marcus forced a laugh, a harsh, brittle sound. "I have nothing to say to you. You're trespassing. Get out before I have you thrown out." "I don't think you will," Elias said. He held up a small, powerful projector, no bigger than his hand. He pointed it at the large white wall behind the orchestra stage. He pressed a button. The video flickered to life, magnified 20 feet high. It was the park. It was Triton. It was Chad and his friends, their faces clear, their actions monstrous. The laughter, amplified by the ballroom's acoustics, echoed through the vast, silent space. It was no longer the sound of youthful fun. It was the braying of jackals. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Women in evening gowns covered their mouths. Men in tuxedos stared, their faces masks of shock and disgust. This was not some anonymous dog on a distant social media feed. This was happening here. The ugliness had invaded their pristine, curated world. Chad stared at his own giant image, his face ashen. He looked like he was going to vomit. "Turn it off," Marcus roared, his voice trembling with fury. "Turn it off now." Elias didn't move. He let the video play, the loop of cruelty repeating itself for all to see. He had their complete, undivided attention. "That is my partner," Elias said, his voice now rising, not in a shout, but in a tone of resonant authority that commanded the room. "His name is Triton. He is a decorated veteran of the United States Navy. While your son was learning how to swing a lacrosse stick, Triton was in Afghanistan, sniffing out IEDs to protect American soldiers. He took shrapnel in his shoulder, saving his platoon from a grenade. He tracked and captured a high-value target after being wounded in a firefight. He has done more for his country in one day than a boy like that will do in his entire lifetime." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He turned his gaze from Marcus to the assembled crowd. "He is old now. He is frail. And for that, your son, the heir to the Covington fortune, decided he was a target. He and his friends decided that courage meant kicking a defenseless animal who was tied to a bench. They laughed. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, judgmental silence. The power had shifted completely. Marcus Covington, the king in his own castle, was now just a man, exposed and vulnerable, the father of a cruel coward. His influence, his money, meant nothing in this moment. He was being judged in the court of public opinion, and the verdict was guilty. Chief Miller, who had been lurking near the back, began to push his way through the crowd, his face grim. He was going to arrest Elias, create a scene, get him out of there, consequences be damned. He had to protect his patron. But Elias saw him coming. He turned to face the advancing police chief. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't assume a fighting stance. He simply stood his ground and spoke, his voice clear and sharp. "Chief Miller, are you going to arrest me for showing evidence of a crime? Or are you going to arrest the man who committed it?" He gestured with his head toward Chad, because every single person in this room is now a witness. Every phone is recording. Make your choice. Whose side are you on? The law's or his? Miller froze. He looked at the sea of phones pointed at him. He looked at the stony, judgmental faces of the city's most powerful people, people whose favor he would need long after Marcus Covington's star had fallen. He was trapped. In that moment, he ceased to be Marcus Covington's man. He became just a police officer, caught in a spotlight he couldn't escape. The power shift was complete. It wasn't just about one man against another anymore. It was about one man, armed with the truth, against a corrupt system, and the system was cracking under the pressure. The foundation of Marcus Covington's empire was crumbling, live, in front of everyone he had ever sought to impress. The ghost had not only walked through the walls, he was tearing the whole house down. The projector clicked off, plunging the wall back into white emptiness, but the images were burned into the minds of everyone present. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Marcus Covington stood there, his face a mottled canvas of rage and disbelief. He had spent a lifetime building an empire of fear and influence, and in the space of 5 minutes, this one man, this nobody, had dismantled it with nothing more than a video and the quiet weight of the truth. He looked at the faces in the crowd. He saw no sympathy. He saw judgment. He saw the cold calculation of people reevaluating their allegiances. He was no longer the untouchable king. He was just the father of a thug. Elias took a step forward. His voice was low again, meant only for Marcus and the few people standing closest. "Here is what's going to happen," he said. The words precise, deliberate, like stones being laid for a foundation. "This is not a negotiation." He held up his satellite phone. "On this phone is a hard drive. It contains everything my friends could find on you, Marcus. Every illegal shortcut, every bribed inspector, every backroom deal that crushed a smaller competitor. The environmental reports you buried. The safety violations you paid to ignore. Everything." A flicker of genuine fear entered Marcus's eyes for the first time. This went beyond public humiliation. This was ruin. Copies of this drive are now in the hands of 3 different national news organizations. Elias continued, the lie delivered with the unshakable conviction of truth. "They are set to be released on a dead man's switch. If I fail to check in every 12 hours, they publish everything. Your empire becomes a crater." He let that sink in. He had taken everything from Marcus, his reputation, his power, and now his future. He had him cornered, stripped of all his weapons. "So, this is your only way out," Elias said, laying out his terms. "First, your son will walk into Chief Miller's office tomorrow morning. He will give a full public confession. He will plead guilty to felony animal cruelty." He glanced at Chad, who looked like he was about to collapse. "Second, you will establish a charitable foundation. You will fund it with $20 million of your own money. Its sole purpose will be to provide lifelong medical care for retired military and police, K9S. It will be called the Triton Foundation." The irony was a blade, and Elias twisted it. "Third, your son will perform 5,000 hours of community service at the animal shelter he will help fund. He will clean cages. He will feed the abandoned. He will learn, firsthand, what it means to care for a creature that is helpless and dependent on human kindness." Each term was a nail in the coffin of the Covington legacy. It wasn't about money. It was about penance. It was about forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions in the most public and humbling way possible. "You do these 3 things," Elias concluded, "and the hard drives will be wiped. You'll be a social pariah, your son a convicted felon, but you won't be in a federal prison. You refuse, and by tomorrow night, the whole world will know exactly what kind of man you are." He turned to leave. He had said all he needed to say. The choice was Marcus's, but it wasn't a choice at all. It was a surrender. "Wait," Marcus choked out, his voice hoarse. "The dog, is it?" "His name is Triton," Elias said, stopping but not turning around. "And he is fighting for his life. You should pray he wins, because if he doesn't," he added, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "no deal will save you from me." He walked out of the ballroom. The crowd parted for him like the sea, a path clearing through the wealth and power. He didn't look at any of them. They were no longer relevant. He had done what he came to do. He had held power to account. He had demanded justice for the voiceless. He drove back to the veterinary clinic, the opulent lights of the city fading in his rearview mirror. The world of money and influence felt 1,000,000 miles away. The only thing that mattered was behind the sterile doors of the clinic. He walked into the small room. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only sound. Nothing had changed. Triton was still there, a still and silent form under a white sheet. Elias pulled up a chair and sat down, his body slumping with a weariness that went bone deep. The fight was over, But the war for Triton's life was not. He reached out and took the old dog's paw in his hand. It was warm. He felt the faint, thready pulse beneath his thumb. He leaned his forehead against Triton's, closing his eyes. "I kept my promise, buddy," he whispered into the dog's soft fur. "The debt is paid. Now it's your turn. You have to fight. You have to come back to me." He sat there for hours as the night deepened, holding on, two old soldiers in a quiet room, adrift in a world that no longer had a place for them, with only each other for an anchor. He didn't know if his words or his presence made any difference. He just knew he wouldn't leave his partner's side. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the window, he felt a slight pressure against his hand. A weak squeeze. He looked up. Two dark, intelligent eyes were looking back at him. Triton's tail gave a single, slow thump against the steel table. Elias felt a crack in the icy wall around his heart. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The battle was won. And maybe, just maybe, the war was too.